Savannah Montgomery, 34, stood frozen as champagne dripped from her hair onto her designer dress, her father's mocking laughter echoing through the banquet hall. "You'll never amount to anything," he had whispered before emptying his glass over her head. What her father didn't know was that my husband had just texted me, "I found the documents. Everyone will know who Charles Montgomery really is in 5 minutes." Before I continue with this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and hit that like button if you've ever dealt with family drama. Subscribe to join our storytelling community, where we share real family revenge stories that will leave you shocked. Now let me take you back to how this nightmare all began. Growing up as Charles Montgomery's daughter meant living in a perfectly curated world of appearances. My father was Westfield's most respected cardiac surgeon, the man who saved countless lives and donated millions to charity. Our sprawling colonial home hosted fundraisers where local politicians and hospital administrators would laugh at his jokes and marvel at his accomplishments. My mother, Elizabeth, always immaculately dressed, played her part as the supportive wife who organized these events with military precision. But behind closed doors, our family was anything but perfect. My father ruled with cold calculation, measuring our worth by our achievements. My older brother James thrived under this pressure, following in our father's footsteps to medical school. I, however, never seemed to meet his impossible standards. "Art history, that's what you're wasting your time on," he had sneered when I announced my college major. "No Montgomery has ever pursued something so frivolous." Despite his disapproval, I excelled, graduating summa cum laude from Brown University. When I was accepted into a prestigious doctoral program at Columbia, I called home, hoping for just a sliver of recognition. "That's nice, Savannah," my mother said distractedly. "Did you hear James got accepted into Johns Hopkins for his fellowship?" Over time, I built my life away from my father's shadow. I completed my PhD, secured a curatorial position at a respected gallery in New York, and met Ethan, a brilliant intellectual property attorney who loved me for exactly who I was. When Ethan proposed, I hesitated to even introduce him to my family. "They're going to find some way to make him feel inadequate," I warned him. "My father especially." Ethan just smiled. "I think I can handle Charles Montgomery." Our engagement dinner was predictably tense. My father spent the entire evening questioning Ethan about his family background, education, and career prospects. When he discovered Ethan came from a middle-class family in Ohio with no Ivy League connections, his disapproval was palpable. "And how exactly do you plan to provide for my daughter?" he asked, swirling his scotch. "By supporting her dreams and working alongside her as a partner," Ethan replied, without missing a beat. "Savannah's career is as important as mine." My father nearly choked on his drink. "That's a convenient philosophy when you're marrying into money." That night, as we drove back to our hotel, I broke down. "I'm so sorry. This is why I've kept my distance." Ethan reached for my hand. "There's something not right about your father, Savannah. The way he needs to control everything, the way he puts everyone down. It's not normal." "It's just how he is," I said, having accepted this reality long ago. "No," Ethan insisted. "There's something more. People who are that obsessed with appearance are usually hiding something." I dismissed his concerns then, but Ethan's words would come back to me in the years that followed. We married in a small ceremony in Central Park, with just close friends present. My parents sent an expensive crystal vase with a card stating they were unfortunately unable to attend due to prior commitments. James didn't show either. For 3 years we built our life together in New York. I advanced at the gallery while Ethan became a partner at his firm. We were happy, successful, and most importantly, free from my father's toxic influence. Then came the call that would shatter our carefully constructed peace. "Your father is retiring," my mother announced. "There's going to be a grand celebration at the Westfield Country Club." The governor is attending, along with the hospital board and all the important families. You need to be there. Mom, you know how things are between us. This isn't about you, Savannah. This is about our family's reputation. Your absence would be noticed. The familiar guilt washed over me. Despite everything, a part of me still longed for my father's approval, still hoped that somehow, someday he might see me for who I truly was. "We'll be there," I finally said. When I told Ethan, he studied my face carefully. "Are you sure about this? It's just one weekend," I reasoned. "We go, we smile for the photographs we leave. How bad could it be? If only I had known then what awaited us in Westfield, perhaps I would have never returned to the place that had caused me so much pain." But fate had other plans, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose decades of carefully guarded secrets and forever change the Montgomery family legacy. As our car pulled into the long winding driveway of my childhood home, I felt my chest tighten. The imposing colonial mansion looked exactly the same: pristine white columns, perfectly manicured lawns, and seasonal flowers arranged with mathematical precision. It was a monument to perfection, just like everything else in Charles Montgomery's life. "Breathe," Ethan whispered, squeezing my hand. "Remember, we're leaving Sunday morning no matter what happens." My mother greeted us at the door, her face tight with Botox and what I recognized as barely concealed anxiety. "Savannah, darling," she air-kissed both my cheeks. "You're looking, well, a bit thin perhaps, but the city life must be exhausting." Before I could respond, she turned to Ethan with a practiced smile. "And Edward, so good of you to come." "It's Ethan, Mrs. Montgomery," he corrected gently. "We've met 3 times now." Of course," she waved dismissively. "Come in, your father is in his study with James and his fiancée." My brother had recently gotten engaged to Charlotte Winters, daughter of my father's oldest friend and colleague. The match was predictably perfect, 2 medical dynasties united. We found them in the wood-paneled study, my father holding court as always. At 65, Charles Montgomery remained imposing. Silver hair perfectly coiffed his surgeon's hands, steady as he poured drinks. James stood beside him, a younger carbon copy, while a beautiful blonde woman sat perched on the arm of his chair. "The prodigal daughter returns," my father announced, not bothering to rise. His eyes swept over me critically. "New York hasn't improved your fashion sense, I see." I smoothed down my simple black dress self-consciously. "Hello, Dad. Congratulations on your retirement." "Humph. Retirement." He practically spat the word. "Board politics forced my hand. I could operate circles around surgeons half my age." "Dr. Montgomery's complication rates were the lowest in the state," James added proudly. "They'll be lost without him." My father nodded, pleased with the validation. "Charlotte's father is taking over as chief of surgery. At least someone competent will be at the helm." I introduced Ethan again, watching as my father barely acknowledged him before launching into a detailed account of his latest surgical innovation. Throughout the conversation, I noticed Ethan studying my father with unusual intensity, occasionally jotting something in his phone. Dinner that evening was an exercise in restraint. My mother had invited several key hospital board members and their wives, positioning James and Charlotte prominently at the table, while Ethan and I were seated far from the center of attention. "And what is it that you do again?" Savannah asked, Mrs. Harrington, wife of the hospital administrator. "I'm a curator at the Kensington Gallery in Manhattan," I replied. "We specialize in contemporary Savannah plays with paintings," my father interrupted with a dismissive chuckle. "A hobby she's managed to convince someone to pay her for." The table rippled with uncomfortable laughter. "Actually," Ethan interjected, "Savannah recently secured a Del Monte original for the gallery's permanent collection. The acquisition made the front page of the arts section in the New York Times." A flicker of surprise crossed my father's face before he regained his composure. "Well, I suppose even finger painting requires administrators." Later that night, as we prepared for bed in my childhood room, still decorated with my high school accomplishments frozen in time, I found Ethan hunched over his laptop. "What are you working on so intently?" I asked. He quickly closed the screen. "Just some case research. Listen, Savannah, has your father ever mentioned a company called Meridian Pharmaceuticals?" I frowned. "No, why would he? Dad's a surgeon, not in pharmaceuticals." "What about clinical trials? Did he ever discuss participating in experimental treatment protocols?" "Ethan, what's going on? Why all these questions?" He hesitated. "Something came across my desk at work a few months ago. A whistleblower case involving experimental cardiac devices and falsified trial data. I didn't make the connection until I heard your father mention his surgical innovation tonight." "Are you suggesting my father was involved in something unethical?" The idea seemed impossible. My father was many things: cold, judgmental, even cruel at times. But his dedication to medical ethics had always been absolute. "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted. "But I've been looking into some things and there are inconsistencies." "Even if there were, what does it matter now? He's retiring." Ethan looked troubled. "Because if what I suspect is true, patients could have been harmed. And your father might not be retiring voluntarily." A chill ran through me. "You can't bring this up this weekend. Promise me, Ethan. This retirement celebration means everything to him." "I promise I won't say anything without concrete evidence," he said, but something in his expression left me uneasy. The next morning, while my mother was busy with final preparations for the retirement gala, I found myself alone with my brother in the kitchen. "James," I started carefully, "has Dad seemed different lately? Stressed about the retirement, perhaps?" James looked up from his medical journal. "Why would he be stressed? He's leaving on top, his legacy secured. No disagreements with the hospital board, no complications with patients." My brother's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying, Savannah? Dad's record is impeccable." "I'm not implying anything. Just making conversation." "Well, don't," James snapped. "You haven't been part of this family for years. You don't get to swoop in now and start asking questions." His reaction was disproportionate, defensive, in a way that only strengthened my suspicions that something wasn't right. As the day progressed, I noticed subtle tensions. Hushed phone calls my father took in private, strained exchanges between my parents, and an unusual number of emergency consultations, pulling my father and James away at odd hours. By evening, as we prepared to leave for the gala, my unease had grown. I watched Ethan adjust his tie in the mirror, his expression grave. "You found something, didn't you?" I asked quietly. He met my eyes in the reflection. "Yes. But I need to verify one more thing before I can be certain." "At the hospital?" He nodded. "I need to slip away during the event. Can you cover for me if anyone notices I'm gone?" "Ethan, whatever you're planning, trust me, Savannah. This is bigger than family politics. Some things can't stay buried forever." As we descended the staircase to join my parents, a sense of foreboding settled over me. Something monumental was about to happen. Something that would forever change the carefully constructed image of Dr. Charles Montgomery and the family legacy he had spent a lifetime building. The Westfield Country Club ballroom had been transformed into a shrine to my father's illustrious career. Display boards showcased newspaper clippings of his groundbreaking surgeries, award ceremonies, and charity galas. A massive projection screen cycled through photographs of Charles Montgomery with celebrities, politicians, and grateful patients. At the entrance, a bronze bust of my father greeted guests, a gift from the hospital board that would be installed in the cardiac wing, bearing his name. "Subtle," Ethan murmured, as we handed our coats to the attendant. My mother fluttered nearby, directing staff and greeting important guests. "Savannah, fix your hair," she hissed as she passed. "The photographer from the Westfield Chronicle is here." The evening proceeded like a carefully choreographed play. Hospital administrators took turns at the microphone, praising my father's contributions to medicine. Former patients tearfully recounted how Dr. Montgomery had saved their lives. Throughout it all, my father sat at the center table, receiving the adulation with practiced humility that I knew masked his towering ego. During the appetizer course, I noticed Ethan checking his watch repeatedly. When the salads arrived, he leaned close to my ear. "I need to step out for about 30 minutes. If anyone asks, I'm taking an important call about a case." "Ethan, please, I'll be back before your father's speech, I promise." He slipped away as the governor began his remarks praising my father's dedication to improving healthcare in their state. I picked at my food, anxiety churning in my stomach. Across the table, James watched me with suspicious eyes as if he could sense something was amiss. "Where's your husband?" he asked during a break in the speeches. "Work call," I replied, trying to sound casual. "A case emergency." James raised an eyebrow. "At 9 on a Saturday night, the law never sleeps," I said with a forced smile. "Unlike surgeons, lawyers don't get to pass their cases to the night shift." My brother's eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, my father stood to approach the podium for his speech. The room erupted in applause. Charles Montgomery cut an impressive figure in his custom tuxedo, his silver hair gleaming under the ballroom lights. He tapped the microphone twice and surveyed the room with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. "Distinguished colleagues, honored guests, friends, and family," he began. "When I first took the Hippocratic Oath 40 years ago, I could never have imagined the journey that lay ahead." I half listened to his speech, my eyes constantly darting to the ballroom entrance, watching for Ethan's return. My father was now recounting his most challenging cases, the lives he had saved against impossible odds. "Medicine is not for the faint of heart," he continued. "It requires unwavering dedication, a willingness to take calculated risks for the greater good. Sometimes progress demands courage, the courage to try new approaches when conventional methods fail." Something in his phrasing made me sit up straighter. There was an edge to his voice, a defensive quality I'd never heard before. "Some might question the paths I've taken, the decisions I've made," my father said, his knuckles whitening around the edges of the podium. "But I stand before you with absolute conviction that every action I took was in service to my patients and the advancement of cardiac medicine." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. James stared at his father with an unreadable expression. And now, as I pass the torch to the next generation of surgeons, my father's eyes found James. I do so knowing that my legacy is secure. The Montgomery name will continue to be synonymous with medical excellence and innovation. He raised his champagne glass. "To the future of medicine, and to those brave enough to push its boundaries." The crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. As my father made his way back to our table, I finally spotted Ethan slipping back into the ballroom, his expression grim but determined. He was carrying a manila envelope that hadn't been with him before. My father, flushed with the success of his speech, took his seat as the dessert course was served. He seemed to notice Ethan's return with a flicker of annoyance. "Work emergency resolved?" he asked, with thinly veiled sarcasm. "Actually, Doctor Montgomery," Ethan replied calmly, "I was following up on some very interesting information regarding Meridian Pharmaceuticals and the XC47 cardiac device trials." The change in my father was immediate and shocking. The color drained from his face, and for a brief moment I saw something I had never witnessed before. "Charles Montgomery afraid?" He quickly recovered, adopting an expression of confused indifference. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. This hardly seems the time or place for business discussions." On the contrary, Ethan continued, his voice low but firm. "I think your retirement celebration is exactly the right time to discuss how patient data was falsified during clinical trials for a device that subsequently failed in 27 patients, resulting in 14 deaths." My mother gasped. James half rose from his chair, his face contorted with anger. "How dare you make such accusations? My father's record is impeccable." "Is it, Ethan?" placed the manila envelope on the table. Because the documents in here suggest otherwise. Documents that mysteriously disappeared from hospital records but were preserved by a nurse who suspected something wasn't right. My father's hand trembled slightly as he set down his champagne glass. Savannah, control your husband. He clearly doesn't understand the complexities of clinical research. I understand enough, Ethan replied. I understand that you received over $2 million from Meridian Pharmaceuticals to fast-track approval for their device, despite early warning signs that it was defective. A heavy silence fell over our table. Around us the gala continued, guests, oblivious to the bomb that had just been dropped in our midst. These are serious allegations, my father finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. Allegations that could be considered defamatory if shared without proof. Which is why I haven't gone public with them, Ethan answered. Yet. My father's eyes darted to the envelope. What do you want? Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Want? I don't want anything, Dr. Montgomery. I'm not blackmailing you. I'm giving you the opportunity to come clean, to take responsibility for your actions before someone else makes that decision for you. My father's face hardened. You have no idea what you're talking about. Medical innovation always involves risk. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good. 14 people died, Ethan said quietly. Their families were told it was unavoidable, that nothing could have been done differently. Because nothing could have been, they were terminal anyway. The admission hung in the air between us. My father seemed to realize his mistake immediately, his jaw clenching as he glared at Ethan. This conversation is over, he hissed, rising from his chair. Savannah, if you had any loyalty to this family, you would leave with this opportunist immediately. I sat frozen, unable to process the implications of what I'd just heard. My father, the man who had set impossible standards for others, had betrayed everything the medical profession stood for. Charles, my mother whispered urgently. People are watching. Indeed, nearby tables had begun to notice the tension at ours. The hospital administrator was looking our way with concern. My father forced a smile and raised his voice. Well, if my daughter and her husband are so eager to make a scene at my retirement, perhaps we should give everyone something to talk about. Before I could react, he lifted his champagne glass and deliberately tipped it over my head. Icy champagne cascaded down my hair and face, soaking into my silk dress and dripping onto the pristine white tablecloth. For one eternal moment, the bustling ballroom seemed to freeze in collective shock. Then my father's laugh, sharp and cruel, broke the silence. Always the clumsy one, weren't you, Savannah? He announced, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Some things never change. Gasps and uncomfortable titters rippled through the crowd as I sat paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of the act. The photographer from the Westfield Chronicle was already raising his camera before Ethan stepped deliberately into his sightline. Savannah, let's get you cleaned up. My mother hissed, her mortification evident not for what had been done to me but for the potential social embarrassment. As I rose shakily from my chair, champagne dripping from my ruined dress, my father leaned close and whispered, "You'll never amount to anything. You're nothing but a disappointment. Always have been, always will be." Words that had been etched into my psyche since childhood. Words that had shaped my insecurities, my desperate need for approval, my retreat from this toxic family. But this time something different happened. Instead of crumbling, I felt a strange calm settle over me. That's when my phone buzzed with Ethan's text. "I found the documents. Everyone will know who Charles Montgomery really is in 5 minutes." My father mistook my sudden stillness for defeat, a smirk of satisfaction crossing his face as he turned back to soothe the concerns of his confused colleagues. "Family drama," I heard him say dismissively. "My daughter has always had a flair for the dramatic. Too much time in those artistic circles, I'm afraid." James approached, handing me a napkin with mechanical politeness while whispering, "Was this really necessary? Tonight of all nights, haven't you embarrassed this family enough?" I looked into my brother's eyes, so like my father's, and saw not the playmate of my childhood, but a stranger who had fully embraced the Montgomery legacy of appearance over substance, reputation over truth. You knew, didn't you? I asked quietly. About the trials, the falsified data. A muscle twitched in James's jaw. You don't understand the complexities. People died, James. People die in medicine every day, he countered coldly. Dad took calculated risks that advanced the entire field. The benefits outweighed the costs. Did the families of those 14 people agree with that assessment? Before he could answer, Ethan returned to my side, his face a mask of calm determination. He placed a protective arm around my shoulders, unconcerned about the champagne soaking into his own expensive suit. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "What did you do? What needed to be done?" he replied simply. Across the room there was a commotion at the entrance. 2 men in suits had entered the ballroom, accompanied by a uniformed police officer. The hospital administrator rose to intercept them, but after a brief exchange, his face paled visibly. Charles Montgomery called one of the men, his voice carrying across the now hushed ballroom. My father turned, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm in the middle of my retirement celebration. Whatever this is, it can wait until Monday." "I'm afraid it can't, sir," the man replied, approaching our table. He withdrew a badge from his inner pocket. "Agent Roberts, FBI. This is Agent Patel. We need to speak with you immediately regarding allegations of medical fraud, falsification of clinical trial data, and criminal negligence in the deaths of 14 patients." The blood drained from my father's face. "This is absurd. Who made these allegations?" Agent Roberts nodded toward the back of the room, where a petite woman in her 50s stood, watching the scene unfold. "Nurse Marilyn Fisher has provided extensive documentation regarding the XC47 trials, including original patient data that was subsequently altered under your direction." My mother let out a small cry. "Charles, what is he talking about?" "It's a misunderstanding," my father insisted, though his voice had lost its usual authority. "These are complex medical matters that laypeople couldn't possibly." "The documentation is quite clear," Dr. Montgomery interrupted Agent Patel, "as are the financial transfers from Meridian Pharmaceuticals to your offshore account in the Cayman Islands." A wave of murmurs swept through the ballroom. The hospital board members exchanged alarmed glances. Charlotte's father, slated to be my father's successor, abruptly stood and distanced himself from our table. "I have nothing to say without my lawyer present," my father declared, the veneer of the respected surgeon crumbling before my eyes. "That's your right," Agent Roberts acknowledged. "We're not here to arrest you tonight, simply to inform you that an investigation has been opened, and to advise you not to leave town." "Who sent you these documents?" my father demanded, his eyes darting suspiciously between the agents. "That's not relevant at this time," Agent Patel replied. But my father's gaze had found Ethan, and the realization dawned visibly on his face. "You!" he hissed. "You did this!" Ethan met his glare without flinching. "No, Dr. Montgomery. You did this. I simply made sure the truth came to light." My father lunged across the table, reaching for Ethan's throat, with hands that had performed delicate heart surgeries on hundreds of patients. "You destroyed everything. Decades of work, my reputation, my legacy." The FBI agents intervened quickly, restraining my father as gasps and cries of shock echoed through the ballroom. Phones were raised, capturing the moment Charles Montgomery's carefully constructed facade finally shattered. "You're nothing," my father shouted as he was led away from the table. "A nobody from Ohio, who married my daughter for her connections. You'll regret this, I promise you that." In the chaos that followed, I remained strangely calm, watching as the illusion of the Montgomery family perfection dissolved. My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing quietly about what people would think. James stormed out, Charlotte trailing uncertainly behind him. Hospital board members huddled in corners, already distancing themselves from the scandal. Through it all, Ethan's hand remained steady on my back, anchoring me as my world transformed. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way," he said quietly. "But when I found those documents in the hospital archives, I couldn't look away. 14 families deserve to know the truth." I felt a lifetime of seeking validation from my father draining away, replaced by something unexpected: relief. "Don't apologize," I told him. "For the first time in my life, I'm seeing my father clearly." The gala disintegrated around us, guests making hurried excuses to leave. As we stood amid the wreckage of my father's celebration, I realized this moment represented a turning point, not just in the Montgomery legacy, but in my own life. I'm sure you can imagine how shocking this moment was for me. After years of emotional manipulation and feeling like I would never be good enough, seeing my father's true colors exposed so publicly was both devastating and liberating. If you're finding this story intense, just wait until you hear what happened next. Make sure you hit that like button. And stay with me. The revelations that followed changed everything I thought I knew about my family. The morning after my father's disastrous retirement gala, the Montgomery household resembled a fortress under siege. My mother had drawn all the curtains, disconnected the landline, and instructed the housekeeper to tell any visitors the family was indisposed. The Westfield Chronicle's front page featured a blurry photograph of my father being escorted from the country club alongside a headline that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. "Esteemed surgeon under investigation, FBI probes patient deaths." "This is a nightmare," my mother moaned, still wearing last night's evening gown as she paced the kitchen. 40 years of building a reputation gone overnight. How will I face the garden club, the hospital auxiliary board? I watched her from the breakfast nook, struck by the realization that her concern remained fixed on social standing, rather than the patients who had died or the ethics her husband had violated. "Mom," I said gently, 14 people lost their lives. Don't you think their families deserve the truth?" She looked at me as though I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Those patients were terminal anyway. Your father took risks that advanced medicine. It's not black and white, Savannah." "That's exactly what James said. Your brother understands loyalty," she snapped. "Something you clearly never learned." Ethan entered the kitchen, his laptop tucked under his arm. Since last night he'd been fielding calls from his law firm, which was suddenly very interested in the whistleblower case he had been pursuing independently. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said carefully, "I've been in touch with some colleagues who specialize in cases like this. If Charles cooperates fully with the investigation—" "Get out," my mother interrupted, her voice icy. "You've done enough damage to this family. I want both of you gone within the hour." I opened my mouth to protest, but Ethan gently touched my arm. "We'll pack our things." Upstairs, as we hastily threw our belongings into suitcases, I felt strangely disconnected from the drama unfolding around me. For years I had carried the weight of my father's disapproval, measuring my worth against his impossible standards. Now confronted with the truth of who he really was, I felt those chains beginning to loosen. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, pausing his packing to study my face. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I should be devastated, but mostly, I feel numb. Like I'm watching someone else's family implode." "It's shock," he said. "The real emotions will come later." Before we could finish packing, the doorbell rang insistently. Through the bedroom window, I spotted James's car in the driveway alongside an unfamiliar black sedan. "Your brother's here," Ethan observed. "And he's not alone." We descended the stairs to find James in the foyer with a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. My mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "This is Warren Mitchell," James announced without preamble. "Dad's attorney." Mitchell appraised us coldly. "Mrs. Montgomery, Mr. Lawrence," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "I understand you're in possession of certain documents pertaining to Dr. Montgomery's work with Meridian Pharmaceuticals." Not anymore, Ethan replied calmly. Those documents have been turned over to the appropriate authorities. Mitchell's expression tightened. Let me be clear. The actions you've taken constitute a serious breach of confidentiality and potentially defamation of character. Dr. Montgomery is prepared to pursue civil action against both of you unless certain conditions are met. I stared at him in disbelief. My father is threatening to sue us after what he did. What Dr. Montgomery did, Mitchell countered, was make difficult medical decisions in the advancement of cardiac care. Decisions that, taken out of context by non-medical professionals, could be misinterpreted. 14 people died, I reminded him, echoing the words I'd spoken to James the night before. And thousands more will live longer lives because of the innovations that resulted from that research, James interjected. The greater good, Savannah. Something Dad always understood. The greater good doesn't justify lying to patients' families, Ethan said. Or pocketing millions in kickbacks. Mitchell's briefcase snapped open. I have here a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange for your silence on these matters, and a retraction of any statements you've made to authorities, Dr. Montgomery is prepared to offer a settlement of $1 million. The room fell silent. I looked from the attorney to my brother to my mother, trying to process what was happening. They weren't just denying my father's wrongdoing, they were trying to buy our complicity. You can't be serious, I finally managed. Completely serious, Mitchell confirmed. Signed today. The funds will be transferred by close of business Monday. Ethan's laugh was hollow. You're actually trying to bribe us to obstruct a federal investigation. That's a felony in itself. It's a standard confidentiality agreement, Mitchell insisted. Nothing more. It's blood money, I said quietly, and we're not interested. James stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Always so self-righteous, Savannah. Always thinking you're better than us. This is your family we're talking about, is it? I challenged. Because from where I stand, this family has never been about love or support. It's been about appearances, about the Montgomery name and legacy. About covering for Dad, no matter what he does. You ungrateful, James began, but our mother interrupted. Enough. She turned to me, eyes hard. Savannah, this is your last chance. Sign the agreement, help us contain this situation, or you are no longer a Montgomery. You will be cut off completely, financially, socially, in every way that matters. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Mom, I stopped being financially dependent on this family the day I graduated college. As for socially, I glanced at Ethan, drawing strength from his presence. I've built a life with people who value me for who I am, not what family I belong to. Then we have nothing more to discuss, she said coldly. Please leave our home immediately. Mitchell closed his briefcase with a snap. This decision will have consequences, Mrs. Lawrence. Serious ones. I'm counting on it, I replied. Just not the kind you're thinking of. As we loaded our suitcases into our rental car, James approached alone, his earlier anger replaced by something more calculating. You know this won't stick, right? He said. Dad has connections everywhere. Hospital administration, medical boards, even the district attorney's office. This will all disappear, and you'll have burned your bridges for nothing. Maybe, I acknowledged. But I can live with that decision. Can you live with yours? Something flickered in my brother's eyes. Doubt perhaps, or a moment of recognition. But it was quickly replaced by the cold Montgomery resolve I knew so well. You were never one of us, he said finally. Maybe that's why this is so easy for you. As we drove away from the house that had never truly been my home, I felt a complex mixture of grief, relief, and uncertainty about what would come next. Are you sure about this? Ethan asked as we headed toward the highway. They're your family. No, I said, watching my childhood home recede in the side mirror. They're just the people I was born to. You're my family now. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of legal depositions, press inquiries, and uncomfortable revelations. The case against my father had grown beyond the original whistleblower complaint, as more hospital staff came forward, emboldened by Nurse Fisher's example. What began as an investigation into a single clinical trial soon expanded to encompass decades of questionable practices. I had returned to my life in New York, throwing myself into work at the gallery, while trying to process the seismic shift in my identity. Ethan had been recruited by the federal prosecutor's office as a consultant on the case, his expertise in intellectual property and healthcare law suddenly in high demand. We heard little directly from my family. James had called once drunk and angry to inform me that Charlotte had broken off their engagement, unwilling to attach herself to a family in disgrace. My mother sent a formal letter through her attorney, officially disinheriting me, and requesting I legally change my last name to dissociate myself from the Montgomery family. She wants me to change my name, I told Ethan, staring at the letter in disbelief. As if I'm the one who brought shame to it. The irony wasn't lost on me that after a lifetime of trying to earn my place in the family, I was now being asked to pretend I had never been part of it at all. The prosecutor's office kept us updated on the case's progress. Despite my father's connections and his legal team's efforts, the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had frozen his offshore accounts, revealing millions in payments from not just Meridian Pharmaceuticals, but 3 other medical device companies. Hospital records had been subpoenaed, showing a pattern of altered patient files spanning nearly 15 years. They're offering a plea deal, Ethan informed me one evening in early August. Your father would serve 5 years in a minimum security facility, surrender his medical license, and pay substantial restitution to the victims' families. Will he take it? Ethan shook his head. Warren Mitchell says he's refusing. He still believes he can beat this in court. That sounds like my father. Admitting wrongdoing was never his strong suit. The trial began in September, transforming the Westfield Federal Courthouse into a media circus. Medical ethicists, former patients, and hospital staff filed in and out of the witness box, painting a damning picture of Charles Montgomery as a surgeon who believed himself above the rules that governed ordinary practitioners. I had no intention of attending the proceedings until the prosecutor called, requesting that I testify about conversations I'd overheard in my father's study as a child. Discussions about managing complications and massaging data. Though I had blocked many of these memories in therapy, I'd begun to recognize how the culture of secrecy in our household had never been normal. The day I took the stand, I entered the courtroom to find my father seated at the defense table, somehow smaller than I remembered. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, his expression unreadable. My mother sat directly behind him, her face rigid with disapproval as I passed. James was conspicuously absent. I testified truthfully about growing up in a household where appearances mattered above all else, where family loyalty was invoked to silence questions, where my father's word was law. I described overhearing late-night conversations with colleagues about patients who had unfortunately not responded well to treatment. During cross-examination, my father's attorney attempted to paint me as a resentful daughter seeking revenge for perceived childhood slights. Isn't it true, Mrs. Lawrence, that you've always felt overshadowed by your father's success, that you've harbored resentment toward him for not supporting your career choices? I wanted his approval, I admitted, but this isn't about me. It's about patients who trusted him with their lives. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I expected to feel drained, but instead, found myself filled with a strange peace. For the first time I had spoken my truth without fear of familial repercussions. The trial's most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. On the 3rd day of proceedings, James was called to testify. Not by the defense as anticipated, but by the prosecution. My brother entered the courtroom looking haunted, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous tension. As he was sworn in, my father leaned forward, clearly confused by this development. Dr. Montgomery, the prosecutor began, You worked alongside your father for the past 7 years. Correct? Yes, James replied, his voice barely audible. And during that time, were you aware of the data manipulation in the XC47 clinical trials? A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. My father's attorney half rose from his chair, then sank back down, perhaps realizing that any objection would only draw more attention to the question. James's eyes darted to our father, then down to his hands. Yes, he finally said. I was aware. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. My mother let out a small cry of distress. And did you participate in altering these records at your father's direction? James swallowed visibly. Initially, no. I questioned the ethics of it. But over time, yes, I helped cover up complications. I was told it was for the greater good, that these measures were necessary to secure funding for more important research. What changed your mind about testifying today? My brother's eyes found mine in the gallery. Someone reminded me what integrity looks like, he said quietly, and I realized I couldn't live with myself if I continued the deception. The prosecution produced a thumb drive that James had provided containing original patient data and email correspondence between my father and pharmaceutical executives, discussing how to manage the reporting of adverse events. My father's face contorted with rage. "Traitor!" he shouted, rising from his seat. "After everything I did for you." As court officers moved to restrain him, James addressed him directly for the first time. "You taught me that the Montgomery name stood for excellence and integrity. But it was all a lie, wasn't it? There was never any integrity. Just ego and greed disguised as medical innovation." The judge called for order, threatening to have my father removed if he couldn't control himself. When James completed his testimony and passed our row on his way out, he paused briefly beside me. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." The prosecution rested its case the following day. By week's end, faced with overwhelming evidence and his son's damning testimony, my father accepted a modified plea deal: 8 years in federal prison, permanent revocation of his medical license, and the forfeiture of assets, totaling over $12 million to be distributed among the victims' families. As we left the courthouse for the final time, reporters swarmed around us, shouting questions about family loyalty and betrayal. "Do you have any comment on your father's sentencing?" one persistent journalist called out. I paused, considering my words carefully. Justice was served today. Not just for the 14 patients who lost their lives, but for countless others who were treated by a man who placed his reputation above his oath to do no harm. "And what about your family?" another asked. "Will you ever reconcile?" Ethan's hand found mine, squeezing gently in support. "Family isn't defined by blood," I answered. "It's defined by love, respect, and shared values. Today, I choose to surround myself with people who embody those qualities." As we walked away, I spotted James standing alone by his car across the parking lot. Our eyes met briefly and he offered a small tentative nod. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something new. A relationship built on truth, rather than the facade that had defined the Montgomery family for generations. 1 year after my father began serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, I stood in the gallery space that had once felt like my only refuge from family expectations. Now transformed into something entirely new. It represented not just escape but purpose. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked, adjusting the banner that hung across the entrance, "The Truth Project: Art and Healing Through Medical Trauma." The exhibition was the culmination of months of work. A collaboration between artists and families affected by medical malpractice. Using funds from my portion of the settlement, which I had initially refused but ultimately accepted on the condition it would be used for this purpose, we had created a space for stories that had previously been silenced. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, straightening a photograph. The centerpiece of the collection showing Nurse Marilyn Fisher standing proud in her uniform. The woman whose courage had started it all. The doors opened at 6 and people began to filter in. Art critics, medical ethicists, former patients and their families. Some faces I recognized from the trial, others were new. Each had a story of trust betrayed, of questions unanswered, of grief compounded by deception. "This is remarkable work," Savannah said. Dr. Elena Martinez, the new chief of ethics at Westfield Memorial Hospital. "Creating space for these narratives is vital to changing medical culture." "I had good teachers," I replied, thinking not of my father but of Ethan, of Nurse Fisher, of all those who had chosen truth over comfort. Midway through the evening, as I was explaining the concept behind a sculpture created by the daughter of one of the XC-47 victims, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find James standing awkwardly in a suit that hung loosely on his now thinner frame. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said, genuinely surprised. We had exchanged occasional emails over the past year, but this was the first time we'd seen each other in person since the trial. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But I'm trying to stop hiding from difficult truths." "How's Mom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from mutual acquaintances. Elizabeth Montgomery had sold the family home and moved to Arizona, unable to face the community that had once revered her. Still in denial, James sighed. "She visits Dad monthly, still believes he was wrongfully convicted. She's rewritten the narrative in her mind." "And you? How are you doing?" My brother's smile was tinged with sadness. "Starting over. I surrendered my medical license voluntarily, couldn't practice knowing what I'd been complicit in. I'm teaching bioethics now at the community college. It's not prestigious but it feels honest." "That takes courage," I acknowledged, truly meaning it. "Less than you think. After you've faced the worst version of yourself, everything else seems manageable." He glanced around the gallery. "This is important work you're doing, Savannah. Dad would hate it, which probably means it's exactly what needs to happen." We shared a small laugh at that, perhaps the first genuine moment of connection we'd had as adults. "Have you visited him?" James asked after a moment. I shook my head. "I've written but I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe someday. He asks about you, you know. Says he's read about your exhibitions in the papers." "What else does he say?" James considered his words carefully. "That he underestimated you. That's as close to an apology as Charles Montgomery gets, I suppose." Before I could respond, Ethan approached with a glass of champagne for each of us. "It's almost time for your speech," he reminded me gently. I nodded, suddenly nervous about addressing the crowd. This exhibition wasn't just a professional accomplishment, but a deeply personal statement about accountability and healing. "Will you stay?" I asked James. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "It's about time a Montgomery stood for something worthwhile." As I made my way to the small podium at the front of the gallery, I caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Ethan beaming with pride, James standing somewhat apart but present, Nurse Fisher with tears in her eyes. And beyond them, the families whose lives had been forever altered by my father's actions, who had chosen to transform their pain into art and advocacy. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began. The Truth Project was born from the belief that healing cannot happen in silence. Each piece in this exhibition represents a story that someone tried to suppress, a complication that was hidden, a question that went unanswered, a life that was valued less than a reputation or a bottom line. I paused, looking around at the artwork that lined the walls, paintings, sculptures, photographs, each bearing witness to loss and resilience. I grew up in a household where appearances mattered more than reality, where the Montgomery name was a shield against accountability. When that shield finally shattered, I had to confront some difficult questions about who I was and what I stood for. My eyes found James in the crowd, standing straighter now, no longer hiding. What I've learned through this journey is that true legacy isn't built on accolades or achievements. It's built on integrity, on the courage to speak truth even when it costs us something. Every artist and family member who contributed to this exhibition, has demonstrated that courage. They've refused to let their stories be erased or rewritten. As I concluded my speech, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me since that fateful retirement dinner. The Montgomery name would forever be associated with scandal now, but perhaps it could also become associated with redemption, not through denial or damage control, but through honest reckoning with harm done. Later that night, as Ethan and I walked home through the quiet streets of Manhattan, he asked, "How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I finally said. "Like I've put down something heavy I didn't even realize I was carrying. Your father's expectations, more than that, the need to be a Montgomery, whatever that meant, the constant awareness of how everything I did reflected on the family name." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "And now I get to decide what my name means. What I stand for." I squeezed his hand. "With you beside me, that feels like freedom." 6 months later, a letter arrived from Pennsylvania. My father's handwriting on the envelope, shaky but still recognizable. I let it sit on my desk for 3 days before finally opening it. "Savannah," it began. "I've had much time to reflect in here. The man I was would never admit to being wrong. Perhaps it's time I stopped being that man." The letter went on. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement of harm done. An admission that his pursuit of legacy had ultimately destroyed it. A recognition, however, belated, of my strength in standing for truth. "You were never what I expected," he wrote in closing. "You were something far better. Someone who could not be corrupted by power or prestige. In the end, you are the best of the Montgomery name because you had the courage to redefine it." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not dismissed, but not given more weight than it deserved. The validation I had once desperately sought from my father no longer defined me. My worth wasn't measured in his approval or the family legacy, but in the truth I had chosen and the life I continued to build. That evening, as Ethan and I hosted a small dinner for friends, including James, and surprisingly Nurse Fisher, who had developed an unlikely friendship, I looked around our table and felt a profound gratitude. A toast I proposed, raising my glass. "To families we choose and truths we tell. To becoming more than the stories we're born into. To integrity," James added quietly. "To justice," Nurse Fisher echoed. "To new beginnings," Ethan concluded, his eyes meeting mine with understanding and love. The Montgomery legacy had been built on appearances, on carefully guarded secrets, and compromised ethics. But sitting there among people who valued truth above comfort, I realized I had found something far more valuable, a life of authenticity, hard-won, but worth every struggle. My father had built his reputation on the belief that ends justified means that some lives could be sacrificed for the greater good. In rejecting that philosophy, I had discovered my own strength, not in spite of the Montgomery name, but because I had the courage to redefine what it meant. I hope my story has resonated with you. Family secrets and betrayals can leave deep wounds, but there's incredible power in standing for truth, even when it costs us something. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of family betrayal, justice, and rebuilding resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about finding strength through difficult truths. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, your worth isn't defined by family expectations, but by the integrity with which you live your own story.